Hello, and thank you for coming along. Today we're going to be talking about pedagogy, about teaching. In fact, there's been an initiative put out to look at this whole question of the pedagogy of transition, educating for the future we want. This is somewhat problematic because it raises the questions of who's doing the educating and who is we. That's a crucial one. Who's the question of we? Who are we when we say we want this? And who says that we are the ones to determine the education of the future? As Yogi Berra used to put it, the future ain't what it used to be. So it may be that the old timers don't really understand what the education should be for the future. Furthermore, as we were reminded by William Butler Yeats, who reflected on things in the time of a civil war, the Irish Civil War, as it were, at that point, we had fed the heart on fantasies, the heart's grown brutal from the fair. Many of our concepts from the past are fantasies. Do we want to teach those to generations in the future? Who will tell the children? Well, we've got to have to work toward a pedagogy of the suppressed. In the post-COVID world, as we are emerging from global lockdown, what should be the shape of humanity's future educational systems? This is an open question, one that has many dimensions. We don't live on a remote planet. We live on Earth. Can remote learning equip us for this really real world? We've come to view the world through screens during the COVID lockdown period. And are we ill-equipped to cope with the really real world through only remote learning that we've come to be accustomed to in the last year? Do we need to focus on learning more science? One of the things that really surprised us was that we didn't know much about the science of pandemics. And what we learned now from it was largely through remote learning, not from personal experience or through schools. Do we need to concentrate as we come back in the post-COVID period on more science? Furthermore, who owns science in the public mind? STEM, you may have heard of. NOVA, you probably certainly have heard of, a program on public broadcasting system. The question is whether they can be used to capture the imagination and vision of youth during and after the global lockdown. STEM comes from science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and many people would argue that STEM learning is what was missing, and this is what can be provided through computer teaching fairly easily. But can more STEM education really solve the big problems we must now confront in a post-COVID world? Perhaps what is needed instead is STEMA, that is, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, but also the arts and humanities, history, social studies, civics, global ethics, climate justice. To begin with, let's take a look at the way science was positioned in the public mind. In a program from CCTV, Cambridge Community Television, just 3 years ago, prior to the pandemic and in the midst of an administration that didn't have much respect for science. It was entitled Nova and the Struggle for the Control of Science in the Public Mind. Many of the science teachers during the administration of the Trump period depended upon Nova as a way of conveying science because their budgets were being slashed. They weren't able to get new textbooks, and teachers went on strike around the country for the rights of their students to learn with better equipment, with renewed textbooks, ones that were up to date. The response was, why bother? Why not just use NOVA programs? Show them TV programs during school time. That'll take care of science teaching. But no attention was paid to the major funding is provided by for the NOVA programs. That became a matter of major concern. Let's take a look then at a program made just 3 years ago and see how strange the debate was then.
Hello, and thank you very much for coming along again this evening. This evening we're going to look at current events in a very direct way, having to do with our understanding of science and the public education crisis that's now emerging around the country. You may have noticed the headlines. People are going out on strike in one state after another. And they're striking not just for higher pay, but for better working conditions and for their students who haven't had a change in textbook in 10 years in some cases and don't have the access to up-to-date science material especially, but in any field, whether it's history, social studies, or the sciences. And the teachers are finally getting out on the street and demonstrating about it rather dramatically. And we're going to look at the way in which there's fallback position depending on public television, and the NOVA program has been used in many cases as a way to shore up and provide for the lack of science education being given in the public schools. So we're going to look at, in a sense, the study of NOVA as a program and the struggle for the control of science in the public mind. It's not for the control of science, but for the image of science in the public mind. We're going to look particularly at the question of who's funding all of that. But to begin with, we'll have a look at, in effect, these broader education matters. What's happening in American education at this point, especially secondary education? Well, you can't turn on the radio and listen for more than about 5 minutes before you hear about it, or for that matter, the evening news has accounts of it as well. Take a look.
Welcome, friends, to another edition of Economic Update, a weekly program devoted to the economic dimensions of our lives, jobs, debts, incomes, our own and those of our children. I want to begin by continuing the shout-out I have offered to the teachers in 4 states, courageous, successful, effective teachers: Arizona, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Oklahoma. Public school teachers in those states have shown the capacity to step up, to say enough is enough, to really stand for the public education of the children of their states by demanding, finally, that the governments in those states pay teachers properly so they can do their job and thereby serve the education of our children, which is about as important as anything states do. They showed the courage to do it, and they deserve our respect, and I am happy to report that there are many cases now of public school teachers in other parts of the United States that are taking inspiration from what these teachers are showing in the way of making a real big difference in the way this world works.
Well, a real big difference in the way this world works. In fact, you can take a look at the news headlines in almost every medium at this point. It isn't confined to 1 or 2 groups, it's across the board. In this particular case, they're looking at the case of Arizona. Take a look.
We turn now to Arizona, where schools are closed for a 5th day as thousands of teachers continue to strike, demanding better funding for education. Crowds of striking teachers dressed in red T-shirts have rallied at the state capitol this week and last to demand a 20% pay raise for educators and decreased class sizes, among other demands. The strike began Thursday with the teachers protesting the $1 billion funding cuts to education in the state since the 2008 recession. Mary Cotnor is a teacher in Rio Rico, Arizona.
Well, the bottom line is funding for education. So a lot of people think it's just for teachers' salaries, and it's not. It's funding for the schools, for our kids. We haven't had the funding stopped in 2008 and has not increased. It's for our support staff as well. So it's for everybody. It's not what some people think just for teachers.
The teacher walkouts in West Virginia, Kentucky, Oklahoma, and Arizona have been described by some as a red state revolt. In 2016, Donald Trump won all 4 of these states. The Arizona legislature is expected to vote on a budget today, which organizers say will now include additional funding for education. If the budget passes, teachers say they will return to class tomorrow.
At a Tuesday evening news conference at the Capitol in Phoenix, the leaders of the Arizona Educators United Group and Arizona Education Association, the state teachers union, credited the teachers movement with the additional education funding lawmakers are expected to approve. So for more, we're going to Arizona, where we're joined right now by Noah Carvelis. He's an elementary and middle school music teacher in Phoenix, one of the leaders of Red for Ed, and Arizona Educators United helped start the teacher protests in Arizona. Noah, welcome to Democracy Now! Just describe the scene at the State House yesterday.
The scene is incredible. We have thousands and thousands of educators down there advocating for their students and standing up and essentially saying enough is enough. On the very first day of the walkout, we started with a march that included about 75,000 people. We filled the streets, and what we showed was decades of frustration, and we stood up and we said that it's time for a change. It's an incredible sight to see right now.
And Noah, could you talk about how this strike developed? Because one of the interesting things about all of these walkouts is that they've occurred largely from the ground up, from the grassroots up, not as calls for the union leaders of either the NEA or the AFT, the 2 major national unions, actually calling the strikes.
Yeah, this has really started from a grassroots organization called Arizona Educators United. We've been building energy and building an infrastructure, and we've worked very collaboratively with the union, with Arizona Education Association, to really move this forward. And it started with educators standing up and saying that we need to bring a change, and that educators are going to be the ones who bring that change. And that's been a very powerful thing for us, especially in a conservative state, to have educators really lead the charge and advocate for themselves and their students.
For themselves and their students. That's the key. They're actually asking for more for students. Now in Oklahoma, you could pick it up in the nightly news on MSNBC. I mean, it's pretty extraordinary. There, the students, and again, were marching with the teachers, actually. And in Kentucky and Oklahoma, it became massive street demonstrations.
Thousands of teachers in traditionally conservative states are protesting against low pay and insufficient funding for public education. Dan Cohen has the story tonight.
Public schools in Oklahoma and Kentucky were forced to close as educators joined wildcat strikes demanding better working conditions. Teacher salaries in Oklahoma and Kentucky are among the lowest in the country, ranking 26th and 49th, far below the national average. 100 Oklahoma school districts are on strike to demand lawmakers approve an additional increase to teacher salaries days after the legislature approved a $6,100 raise. Even with that amount, Oklahoma teacher salaries are still below the national average of $58,353. 120 school districts are closed in Kentucky as thousands of teachers came from around the state to rally at the Capitol, protesting drastic cuts to the state pension plan and low expenditures per student.
In order for our students to be successful, they need top dollar. We're not an afterthought. We are not something that you can put at the bottom of the bucket. We're not something that you can put lobbyists over. We are the future. I mean, our students are the future, and they need to fund our future.
The recently passed amendment to the pension plan would raise the eligibility age before teachers can qualify for their pensions, bar future teachers from enjoying traditional pensions in favor of cash balance plans, and even allow lawmakers to unilaterally reduce teacher pension plans in violation of previously negotiated collective bargaining agreements. These protests follow a successful 9-day strike in West Virginia that ended with teachers getting a 5% pay raise. In Arizona, hundreds of teachers walked out last week, and the union-affiliated Arizona Education Association has given them full-throated support. Arizona ranks 47th in the country in expenditures per student, spending $4,000 below the national average.
Now, it's very important, in fact, to look at that list and to see who's at the top spending the most per student. It can be argued it's the most educated state in the Union. Vermont is number one, spending the most. Arizona, number 47 out of 50. Pretty extraordinary, and politically it has implications. An educational system that works has a citizenry that votes. It's pretty extraordinary. In Oklahoma, the case is even more dramatic. They're in the State House.
Schools across Oklahoma are closed today for a third day as teachers continue their strike demanding more funding for education and increased pay. Oklahoma's public education budget has been slashed more than any other state since the start of the recession in 2008, and its teachers are among the lowest paid in the nation. Scores of teachers are planning to begin a 123-mile protest march today from Tulsa to Oklahoma City. Meanwhile, thousands of teachers continue to protest in Kentucky, demanding a reversal to a provision in a recently passed bill about sewage treatment that gutted teacher pension benefits. On Monday, every school in the state was closed, either due to spring break or anticipation of a massive rally in the capital of Frankfort when teachers filled the rotunda of the Kentucky State Capitol chanting, "Fund our schools." This is Kentucky Education Association President Stephanie Winkler.
There will be no more bills like that after November. No! We have to fight for every single new teacher. You can tell me all you want. It's not going to hurt you. If you hurt one of us, you hurt all of us.
This year's wave of teacher rebellions began in West Virginia, where teachers won a 5% pay raise after an historic strike. The protests have also inspired teachers in other states, including Arizona, where union members are threatening to strike unless their demand for a 20% wage increase is met. The teacher protests in West Virginia, Oklahoma, Kentucky, and Arizona have been described by some as a red state revolt.
A red state revolt. And in Oklahoma, you can see it's right next to what? Well, the thing they have a big monument to, which is an oil derrick, right outside the capital of Oklahoma. This can give you a clue as to why they're not funding public education. They have other priorities, as the governor pronounced it. Well, this is part of a large reaction to the current administration and its rejection of not only science in the public policy realm, but even teaching about science.
Not known as a boisterous bunch, scientists left the lab and hit the streets today.
Our lawmakers must know and accept that science serves every one of us, every citizen of every nation and society.
Around the world, scientists, teachers, researchers, and supporters echo that message. From Europe, Asia, to as far away as Antarctica, where researchers posted their support on social media. For many Americans, the binding issue is climate change. They fear a president who once called it a hoax, who has undone much of the past administration's work on the issue, and threatened to pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement.
I'm very concerned that the government is discrediting science and scientific facts with the objective of manipulating us.
For others, the worry is Donald Trump's proposed budget, which includes a $5 billion cut to the National Institute for Health.
I am Dr. Mona.
The doctor who helped expose the Flint water crisis says the cause and effect of cuts on medical and health research is obvious.
Flint is what happens when we dismiss science. Flint is what happens when we dismiss experts.
Marchers say even Trump's immigration policies hurt science.
As experts.
Marchers say even Trump's immigration policies hurt science.
Well, not only the immigration policy, but the funding cuts in every single state. It's pretty extraordinary. Some of the argument coming forward in defense of what has been cut has been saying, well, who needs public science education anyway? Don't students everywhere have access to NOVA? Programs like Decoding the Weather Machine, which has been put out on NOVA, are far more impressive than any science teacher can provide. So why not give students access to the television? Why fund secondary school science when the best scientific research can be given to them over the television? Well, this raises very interesting questions, and we need to look at the NOVA program itself. Take a look.
Most people sense a change in the weather. It's not your imagination.
Megastorms, droughts, fires.
We're seeing 1 in 1,000-year floods with astonishing frequency.
How many times does that have to happen before it's not a fluke, but it's a trend?
Is this trend the new normal?
Our planet did not come with a manual of how it all works.
To understand how it works, NOVA explores one of the greatest scientific quests of all time.
This is the essence of science.
A global investigation of our climate machine. And how it determines our weather.
Yeah, super clean data.
Well, this is fascinating. I mean, we're going to have a NOVA program on our weather and how it is a machine, is the way they call it, decoding the weather machine. Well, this is very interesting because who are the funders behind it? Well, we're told they're viewers like you on all the public stations like WGBH World here in Boston. As part of the World Series, WGBH brought this to you. And the funders are not just viewers like you, they're also groups like Draper Labs here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And if you wait through the credits, you'll see David H. Koch and his Fund for Science. What's the message of Draper Lab in these programs produced by NOVA. 2-hour program. Very interesting.
The stakes are high, yet the outcome uncertain.
We're poking at the climate system with a long, sharp, carbon-tipped spear.
And we cannot perfectly predict all of the consequences.
Can these discoveries show us where our planet is headed?
What gives me hope is that we understand this, so we actually can do something about it.
It's a planetary crisis, but we're clever enough to think our way out of this.
What gives me hope is that we understand this, so we actually can do something about it.
It's a planetary crisis, but we're clever enough to think our way out of this.
Okay, that's the message coming from Draper. Yeah, it's a planetary crisis, but we're clever enough to think our way out of this. And who's clever enough? Well, not the scientists you've been hearing out there. It's the scientists in the Draper lab that you ought to listen to. It's really extraordinary. The ways in which the message now is not selling you a particular product. It's selling you an attitude that you should hand it over to the engineers in Draper Labs, or for that matter, to our old friend, in fact, and well-known person, David H. Koch, and the Fund for Science, right? It's pretty extraordinary. Take a look.
We understand this, so we actually can do something about it.
It's a planetary crisis, but we're clever enough to think our way out of this.
Right now on NOVA, decoding the weather machine.
Major funding for NOVA is provided by the following.
At Draper, we have a blend of engineers, biologists, physicists, psychologists, and astronauts working together to push the boundaries of what's possible and engineer solutions to the world's challenges. We are Draper.
Okay, we are Draper. We're not selling you any particular product. It's not like an ad, no. No, we're underwriting the NOVA program. We're providing, in fact, we're engineering possibilities, as they say. Engineering possibilities. This is what you should trust us for, and why we have underwritten 2 hours worth of a magic bullet solution to climate change. It's really quite extraordinary, worth viewing again. Take a look.
We understand this, so we actually can do something about it.
It's a planetary crisis, but we're clever enough to think our way out of this.
Right now on NOVA, decoding the weather machine.
Major funding for NOVA is provided by the following.
At Draper, we have a blend of engineers, biologists, physicists.
Now this is absolutely priceless. What do they have at Draper? They list them, actually. It's very revealing, more revealing than they know themselves. Because the list is very interesting, but who does it leave out? Listen again. I mean, it's really quite priceless. You can't make this stuff up. It's really so revealing.
At Draper, we have a blend of engineers, biologists, physicists, psychologists, and astronauts working together to push the boundaries of what's possible and engineer solutions to the world's challenges. We are Draper.
Okay, they are Draper, engineers, biologists, psychologists, and astronauts. How about a historian? What about somebody who knows anything about politics? What about anybody who has looked anywhere in the world at the sociology, the impact on social systems of climate change. No, we're looking at the weather machine. We're going to decode the weather machine as engineers, and our team of experts is going to, as they say, engineer possibilities here. Pretty extraordinary. But it doesn't stop there. Take a look at the sponsors.
The David H. Koch Fund for Science, supporting NOVA and promoting public understanding of science.
Wow, boy, this may mark a huge conversion. Promoting public understanding of science, right? You gotta be kidding. David H. Koch has not been known for promoting public understanding of science. He's been known for spending efforts, hundreds of millions of dollars of efforts to avoid the public understanding of science. It's pretty extraordinary.
And the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by PBS viewers like you.
Oh, well, you're brought into it too because you've contributed to this. PBS, we all contribute to PBS, right? And everybody contributes to NOVA in order to see more of these programs, right? Fantastic. It's really quite extraordinary.
Thank you. Major funding for decoding the weather machine is provided by the Ives Family Fund, dedicated to advancing the public dialogue on climate and the environment.
Oh, that'd be nice. Dedicated to advancing the public dialogue. Well, we have not so much the advancing of public dialogue as solutions here. It's really quite a different approach. Fund for Science? Are you kidding? This is coming out just as David H. Koch has also been revealed to be behind this.
Thousands of pages of newly released emails reveal how EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt closely collaborated with oil, coal, and gas companies backed by the Koch brothers to roll back environmental regulations during his time as Oklahoma's Attorney General. The documents were released just days after Pruitt was sworn in as the new head of the EPA, the agency tasked with curtailing pollution and safeguarding public health.
Right, okay. Well, the Koch brothers are forwarding their man to the administration. This is why NOVA and the struggle for the control of science in the public mind is really quite problematic. It's not sufficient to roll back commitments to public education in science because you're handing it over to a whole group of corporate funders. And a new kind of alliance is necessary at this point. A new kind of citizen science alliance to work for a just and sustainable future.